It's really good to see everybody. So a lot of you know us, some of you maybe don't, but we are Fishing into the Future. We're a fisherman-led charity, and we have a mission to, sorry, I'm going back and forth and letting people in and doing this. I usually have someone else doing this bit. We're a fisherman-led charity, and we have a mission to share knowledge and create connections, which is what we're trying to do today at our Fishing into the Future talks. So with these talks, this is just like one facet or one thing that we do as a charity, where we bring interesting topics and speakers to fishermen and people working in the fishing industry, and we try and create a conversation that encourages people to talk about these like really important topics, but then also prioritizes the voices and ideas coming from people in industry. We hope to create kind of like a safe and an informal environment for you all to kind of be able to have a chat. So it's not supposed to be like a big pressure space. It's just supposed to be a nice place for us to talk about really interesting things. And the idea is that you come away from this call and we're all like a little bit better prepared and connected to work together effectively. So Beshlie, say hi, Beshlie. You are helping me out today on the call. She is co-hosting with me. Just a couple of housekeeping bits before I pass over to Beshlie. Ideally, you'll stay muted. If you struggle finding the mute button, I'm okay to mute people and help you unmute as well. Yeah, the aim is to share your knowledge and experience and hear your questions and feedback. So please take an approach to engage in the dialogue, and we try and focus on collaborative conversation. That doesn't mean we don't have to like get out any controversy, but we do try and be collaborative. We prioritize fishermen's voices. So if you're not actively working in the fishing industry, you're really welcome here. But we just might come to fishermen before we come to anyone else if there's questions and conversation going on. And we just want everyone to be respectful so we can continue to hold these discussions. I'm recording this. The whole thing will be recorded, but only the first part of the session where we've got the speakers, we will put online, and the conversation that we get into afterwards, that will kind of just be kept for my own reference, because some really interesting ideas come out of it, but you won't have to worry about any comments or questions from the Q&A bit coming out online. So feel free to speak as you want to. We've got some really knowledgeable people from a variety of backgrounds. Really, we're going to go through a few questions with them. And this is a really popular topic. So I just kind of want to mention that this is just kind of call one. And I think we're going to find some really interesting aspects of collaborating and associating and working together and representing. And hopefully we can like dig into those in more sessions further down the line. Just before I hand over to Beshlie, I want to mention, because like a few of you I've spoken to a few of you today, I want to acknowledge that Trevor Bartlett passed away today, or I think late last night. Although he's not someone I know personally, I do know he was a really important person to a lot of you joining and speaking today. And I think it sounds like he was pretty on spot for this topic. I think he did a lot of work around bringing people together and speaking on behalf of fishermen. So I just want to send my condolences to all of you who knew him and were close with him. And if anyone wants to mention him or remember him, you're really welcome to do that in this space. So yeah, Beshlie, I'm going to pass over to you, and thanks very much for helping me out with this.
Hi everyone. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Beshlie. I'm working with South Devon and Channel Shellfishermen down in the West Country. We're called South Devon and Channel Shellfishermen, but actually we're not all shellfishermen. I can't even say it. We're not all shellfishermen, and we're not all in the West Country. Anyway, so why are we having this conversation today? Well, I think a lot of us find this really important. You know, we're a pretty large workforce working in fishing. A lot of us are dispersed around the coast. A lot of us are isolated in wheelhouses, on decks, or like me in my home office with my dog. And it's a really important discussion to have to make sure that those of you who are at sea are feeling heard, feeling like you're participating, perhaps you're represented. How do you not miss out on opportunities and discussions? The session today is called Fishing Associations and Representation. But really the word association means a lot of things. So we're not just talking about associations, we're talking about organising, collective bargaining, associations, community interest companies, co-ops, producer organisations, all of those kind of things. We're talking about representation. So who from your community is able to speak for you, or are you able to speak for your community? How will you feed back to those people? How would you make them feel included? A lot of us have got a lot of different experiences, different ways of doing things. So hopefully by having this conversation, we can all learn from each other and perhaps do things better in future. Just to reiterate something Emma said earlier, Fishing into the Future doesn't speak on behalf of anybody. It's the aim is to support people in speaking for themselves or organising, forming a collective, those kind of things. Just bring people together and create that community, create more connections, and help us all work together better in future. And I'm going to be quiet now.
Thanks, Beshlie. So those of you who've joined us before know that I usually, it says I'm muted. Can you all hear me? Because I'm just not, yeah, okay, good. That's like my computer, I'm muted. So those who've joined us before know that we usually go through people and we have like a series of presentations, but we're changing the format a little because we thought it'd be better to get a bit more dynamic with this and actually ask people questions and get some really specific ideas and send us in a specific direction around this. So what I'm going to be doing with the help from Beshlie, if I need it, is I'm going to start off with you, Beshlie, is I'm going to ask you a couple of questions and hopefully you're going to help us get acquainted with your role and some of the learnings and things you'd like to share with us about your experience with this topic. So I think my first question is that I know you've got a background in fisheries management. You haven't always worked kind of embedded in the industry, but at some point you made that turnaround and decided to go and work with a fishing association. So it'd be really interesting to hear your background and how you got to where you are today and the skills you picked up along the way that you think might have been really useful for you to fulfill this role.
Unmute again. So yeah, again, some of you will know me from my old life when I worked for MAF as a fisheries inspector. I mean, before that, my first ever job was actually, and I call it a job loosely, but it was actually pulling little shore crabs out of the salmon nets on the local river, 20p a crab, but maybe that was to keep me quiet. Interest in fishing from, being one of those generations who hung around on the quayside being vaguely annoying to everyone. I went to uni, and yeah, I ended up working with MAF, who is now the MMO fisheries inspector. Some of that was very difficult for me, but actually it was a really good base in understanding the fisheries regulation side of this world, because let's face it, that is really, really complicated. I feel that working with MAF and then MMO really helped me understand some of the more technical side of things. And it certainly helped me temper my own passion for this industry and learn to communicate in a slightly more coherent way, although possibly not today. That particular role, there was quite a lot of conflict, and that experience was very valuable generally to learn better how to manage some conflict, and also perhaps to translate people's emotion into something that sounds a bit more dispassionate when you're dealing with regulators, that kind of thing. Because fishing isn't a job, it is a life, and when you're living something, it's very difficult for it not to be all encompassing, and that the passion from people is real, it is their lives, but as a representative I have to take that kind of emotional element out and just leave the passion there.
I'll mute myself. Thanks, Beshlie, that's amazing. I think you've given yourself a bit of an advantage from your background, and that sounds really, really great. My next question to you is, I guess, from all of these things that you've collected to get to where you are today, what have you understood that makes a good representative? And I guess you have an idea of what makes a good representative, but then also what do you keep in mind when you're working on behalf of the South Devon and Channel Shellfishermen?
I come across a lot of fisheries representation, colleagues and friends, and the thing that I've noticed through most of those who I feel are most effective is their ability to listen. many people working in fisheries representation are really good, active listeners. And that's really important. You need to hear what people are saying. I think you also need to be a bit of a translator. So, for example, something that always sticks in my mind is when somebody I know phoned me up and said, "Here, Bash, those Frenchies are towing the splats for the longfish. You need to get on to math." Woo! And I knew what that meant. But if they'd phoned math and said, "The Frenchies are towing the splats for the longfish," someone would have just gone, "What?" and hung up the phone without knowing. So you do need to have that little bit of, okay, I think I know what that means. Actually, maybe I should just check that I've got it right. I think most of the fisheries representation that I come across, people tend to be quite good communicators and recognise that actually, depending on your audience, you may need to say something differently between two sets of people. Even though you might mean exactly the same thing, you might need to use a different set of words. And I think that tailoring your communication to who you speak to is really important. And I'm not going to lie, it does help to have a thick skin if you're working in fisheries representation because of that emotion and passion that I mentioned earlier. Sometimes when people are feeling something, they will take it out on you. But you have to know that it's not aimed at you. It's just aimed and you're the one who's catching it. So I think for me, probably the most important things about working in fisheries representation are being able to listen, being able to translate and communicate, and just understanding that you don't need to take it all in and all home with you. You share the passion with those people. And when they're angry, it's usually everything else and not you personally.
That's really insightful. When people are angry, I often take it personally. So thanks for that. That is really interesting. I'm going to move on to I'm going to say sidekick. Your previous like Alan Steer, because I know he's also at his boat and wants to go home. That's the beauty of these calls. People often join while they're mending pots or in the wheelhouse. So thanks for joining us, Alan. And I know you work really closely with Beshlie. I know is it a fourth generation fisherman or is Alfie a fourth generation? So
Alfie's fourth.
Alfie's the fourth generation. Yep. And you're the vice chair of South Devon Channel Shellfishermen. You've kind of been involved since its inception. And I think, I mean, a lot of us already know a bit about, the history of the group. But I think it's a really interesting origin story of the association, of why it came about and how it was set up. So it'd be really interesting to hear kind of from your perspective, what's the origin story? Why did it come about that you all banded together as a group of fishermen and have since stayed that way?
Hi there, Emma. Thanks for the question. It probably started back in the 60s, really. I'm vice chair of South Devon and Channel Shellfishermen, if no one doesn't know me. And South Devon Channel Shellfishermen started back in the late 60s. It started with the same as everywhere around the coast. There was a lot of small, very artisan beach boats working out of little cottage industries. And during the early 60s, that started to change with technology. The bigger boats started coming around and going further afield. And the fishermen really struggling with their markets with increased catches. So South Devon and Channel Shellfishermen was originally set up in 1968 to try and find some better markets for the shellfish fleets around the southwest. That's how it started. But it quickly became a go-to for a lot of other things. There was certainly some science done in the early 70s done with tagging crabs. So what started off just to try and get some markets has really massively turned into a like Beshlie said earlier on, we've got over 100 members, 80 boats all around the country. And, we deal with a lot of problems, and Beshlie's very good at that for us.
That's amazing. Thanks. I guess it's a really great story, and it doesn't sound like it's always been easy. I kind of wanted to get into, from the past to the present, what's been, do you think, the biggest benefit of having the association, having such a strong association in the area, but also understand some of the hurdles and the biggest difficulty you've had to kind of get through to make it work as it does today?
The biggest benefit is fairly obvious. It's like Beshlie said earlier on. Fishermen are quite lone, single voice, don't often get much chance to speak to management or science or other people that are involved. So having the association brings us all together and we can speak with one voice. And that is quite a powerful advantage when you're talking to management organisations. If you can say, we've got 100 members and this is what they think, that is the biggest advantage of having an association like we do here. And that's why everyone should really try and get involved, because it's the best way to get your voice out there. The disadvantage, on the other hand, is trying to get 100 members all to agree. So that can be getting a consensus out of everyone. But no, it's brilliant. And I think anyone that has a fisherman's organisation or a PO and has a speaker like we do with Beshlie that can translate everything the fishermen shout at her and take that forward, it's fantastic. And that's the real advantage of what we do. Also, we've had being static gear fleets, we've had a voice with the mobile gear sector, because as we grew in size as shell fishermen, so did the scallop and beam fleet. And there was quite a lot of conflict involved between fishermen in the early years. So having an association that could speak and manage this conflict was good. And that's how the inshore potting agreement came about in South Devon, was fishermen literally drawing lines on a chart and dividing up areas, and that was all done through South Devon and Channel Shellfishermen as well. So.
Yeah, thanks, Alan. It sounds like it was a really key movement for you all to make in order to kind of shift that balance of power, I guess, to have a voice. Would you say, before I let you go, has it been worth it?
Absolutely fantastic. When I was younger, I took over the boat from my father when I was in my 20s, and I didn't know much about the science, the management, the policy side of it. And being involved with the association and fishing into the future, it's really taught me a lot, and I've found it so beneficial. I can't tell you how useful it's been. And it really does make a difference to the industry and how you work, because you can speak to people. It's fantastic. You get to know people, you build trust and friendships with people. It really is worth getting involved.
Thanks, Alan. I think we've got 50 people on the call at the moment, and a lot of you are fishermen based around the coast, and it's a way for us to bring people together. So it's been a delight. Thank you, Alan. You can go home now.
Yeah, I gotta get back to painting the boat. Thank you.
Cheers. Thank you. Right, we're gonna move on. I've got Mike Roach. Mike, you're obviously now at the NFFO, but you have come from like a background where you've kind of been involved in science, then been involved in like kind of a lot more regional organizations as well. But you've kind of, for a while, I guess, just correct me if I'm wrong, but you hold a position now where you've done a representing, and you've got the skills already and the ability to be heard by others. So naturally now, from your position at the NFFO, you're going to have the ear, you're going to have a seat at the table, you're going to have the ear of important people. So I would like to hear from you, not necessarily like how you get your voice across, but more about what you do to collate information and try and remove your own bias and do a good job as a representative. Yeah, go ahead.
Evening, everyone. Just for those that don't know me, I'm Mike Roach. I'm now Deputy Chief at the NFFO, been there about 12 months. But before that, worked for a regional organisation, as Emma said, based in East Yorkshire. So it's a really tricky concept, representation, and making sure that what you say as a representative is actually representative of who you're meant to be representing. Funny that they're all the same word, aren't they? I've got a fair bit of experience. I've worked at sea. I've got a scientific background, so I can look at a document, rip it to pieces, an impact assessment for a wind farm, for example. Rip it to pieces on the merits of what's in front of me, but that's not my job. My job is to collate the information from the fishermen that are our members that using the wind farm example, that wind farm will impact, and what and how those impacts will be felt, and then hold people to account for such. And it's not easy. The federation is, or the NFFO rather, is what the key organisation in England and Wales that people come to speak, to engage. But we have an incredibly wide membership. Our smallest vessel is 4.3, our largest is 120. I think we cover we have members that fish in every possible sector. So how do we actually make sure that those views are getting fed into our responses? And it's incredibly difficult to do so when it's such a disparate industry. Communications can be incredibly challenging. You send an email out requesting information, you don't necessarily get information back. So then what do you do? So I'll use an example of how I see a representative group working under the mandate of its members. So the seaweed farm in Port Quinn, that is, everyone's currently up in our arms about. Beshlie's laughing now because she knows what's coming. Last September, with Beshlie's help and John Ball's help in the area, we were trying to get a single fisherman to complain about that wind farm so I could write a response. Nobody would, so I couldn't respond, irrespective of the fact I knew there would be an impact. Was it 2 weeks ago in The Guardian? Martin Clunes is now behind the campaign. But all we can do as a representative group is canvass our members, and if we can't get anyone to actually engage and say, actually, it will be an issue, then we're not mandated to do anything about it. When we get that voice, we then have to take those comments and turn them, just like Beshlie was talking about, the translation into an effective tool to try and get our point across. So Scarborough, where I am, they wanted an extension of a seaweed farm licence. The fishermen there give me lots and lots of information, and I basically had to go through and go, can't use that, that's useful, can't use that. That's a new swear word, so I'll add that to the list. And this is what we have to do. We have to ensure that when we're speaking for our members and not ourselves. Yes, we have experience. Yes, we all have our skill sets. But the reason people listen to the Federation and other organisations, and there's lots of them, I'm just speaking for ourselves, or even when I worked for the Holderness Fishing Industry Group, is because you have a mandate to speak on behalf of your membership. That's the advantage of representation and associating, is it brings a collective voice together into a single point. And I think it's really important. Incredibly difficult, because I'm a firm believer you put two fishermen in a room, you get three different opinions. But it is about ensuring that the key take-home messages are put across with whatever you're doing, whether it's talking to DEFRA, arguing with a wind farm company, or speaking as a fisherman's representative in whatever forum. It's collating that broader view and pulling all those little tidbits of information together to present a sort of single piece of information that can be absorbed by the likes of DEFRA, shall we say. Simple, key information that's hard-hitting and effective. It takes a lot of work, it takes a lot of effort. We're not perfect at it, but you've just got to keep working at it. And it is a challenge that we need to keep pushing.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. It's really interesting. I think it's really interesting how you've kind of got this view of what it's like to work at a smaller organisation, not necessarily smaller, but like a more regional, more focused, and then you've kind of gone to this bigger one. So I guess my next question I want to ask you is, how does that fit in together? And what's the value for the industry of like having this mix of smaller and bigger and making them work together?
I'm just a firm believer that we are all stronger together in whatever form that takes. Regional associations have the local expertise and the local knowledge, and the problem we see is regional associations tend to form in response to a catalyst. So in my past experience, it was a wind farm being put on a lobster ground. That's what drove everyone together. The reality is, if they were together first, there would have been potentially an opportunity for more effective resistance rather than coming to it after the event. And it's often challenging when there are so many things happening at sea that affect the fishing industry individually, but also broadly. So those regional associations are at that front line. They are the fighting front, so to speak, where things are happening to them. Having those local expertise that can, in a perfect world, feed into the likes of the NFFO, and that's how we work through our regional committee model. It means that the larger organisations have a voice in a different forum. So it's getting those regional concerns all the way up through the chain to whoever needs to be listening to it. And that's how they can work together, but there's a place for both. There's absolutely a place for both. Ideally, everyone's working together towards a common goal. Everyone needs to see a fishing industry that's surviving into the future. That's what everybody wants. And the other side with the national versus regional is the national should be there to help the regional. So look back to the seaweed farm example I used a minute ago with Beshlie. That's it. Even though we tried last year, that's an issue now. And I'm talking to the MMO next week about it. To look at how they're actually accepting these seaweed farm licensing applications, which are nonsense. So that's where it feeds both ways, and that's a perfect scenario. Because your national or your larger groups tend to look at policy level interventions, wider impacts to industry, whereas the regional focuses more on the day-to-day, and it all matters. It all matters, and it all needs to work across the spectrum, really. So absolutely place for both, and it should be feeding both ways.
Thanks. That's super interesting to hear. And I think a lot of us kind of have that question, is like, what's the puzzle? Like, how does it all fit in together? And perfectly timed. I'm going to come to Aubrey after Mike. But first of all, before we get, because I want to come back to this whole idea of like, how does the regional fit into the national? And I think, Aubrey, we chatted on the phone the other day and we chatted through a few of your ideas. But first of all, I want to come back to the association or the community interest company that you guys set up in Lyme Bay, which I think is a really, really interesting story. And I know you were involved in kind of from day one. So could you give us a bit of a summary about the Lyme Bay Kick and the setup process and kind of what you got out of it, and tell us a bit about that first, because I'm not sure if everyone knows, and if they don't, they should know. So
yeah, I mean, the reality of it is that as a group of fishermen from 4 ports, we were already engaged with each other and brought together by the Blue Marine project that was going on in Lyme Bay. So we were fortunate enough to have Mandy Wolf, who came in with a passion to, and she came from a fishing background, but she didn't realistically have the knowledge of the guys on the ground and what the various problems were. The reality of it was Blue Marine and the fishermen, yeah, they saw eye to eye now and again. And the last 3 years with Blue Marine, I used to attend the table wholly and solely to try and translate what the fishermen were trying to say to Blue Marine, and say to Blue Marine, you're trying to get one over on the fishermen. But anyway, we got to a point where Blue Marine were pulling away, and there was a few crosswords with Blue Marine, and we were fortunate to have Blue Marine that put match funding into the pot for us to kick off the CIC. In reality, it's not an easy path. It's quite labour intensive, and probably took about 6 to 8 months before you could actually get the whole thing up and running. By the time you've registered everything, got all your ducks in a row, got your applications in for grant funding. And in all reality, if you didn't have that one person there with a passion and a devotion to making it happen, it wouldn't have happened. There's trials and tribulations. You got Mike, you've got Alan, who've said that, you know, if you've got one fisherman sat in a bar, he's usually sat in the corner arguing with himself. Is the reality of it. And if you've got two of them, three of them, you've got a real punch up on your hand. But as Beshlie says, trying to understand what they're trying to say to you and put it in some sort of perspective that any management body, or policy maker would understand, it is hard work. There was a lot of initial, but what are we going to get out of this? It's this, that, and the other. And as people have got together and we've moved through the last 12 months, most of the people sat around the table, the majority, they caught up with it. Yes, it is a good idea. One of the things I said to Mandy when early doors, when she started working for Blue Marine, which was about 4 years prior to us setting up, and I said to you, you don't realise what you've taken on. And she said, well, what does it need? I said, you need to get us in the door at Westminster as a group. And basically, lo and behold, where did we go in January? To Westminster. So, but you do have to have somebody with a passion. It's still a very bumpy road, I can assure you. But one thing it's done for me, interacting with the managers and the policymakers, is I do feel that I've always been listened to, but I was acting as an individual, feeding into them what I had actually interpreted from the meetings sat with the various fishermen within Blue Marine, and they did take note of me, because I got the ability to interpret what their problems are and how they feel into language that they understand up as high as policymaker. So in all reality, me personally, I've got out of it. I've got a body of fishermen sat behind me, and I can go into any meeting and say, on behalf of 46 fishermen, we want this, which is the same as Mike saying as a national. And they do tend to listen.
Yeah, that's amazing. I think there's a lot to be said. Like, fishermen can do a fantastic job of representing themselves and representing community, but also marrying that together with someone like Mandy, or I always say, like, everyone needs a Beshlie. Having that other person that's had a different experience and has a different way of communicating can just be such a powerful combination. And that's brilliant. But what I really want to come back to now is that second point, what you said, fitting, because we had a great conversation the other day about how, visioning, how to make things work better together between channeling information up and having the more national associations work better together with the regional. So I don't know if you want to share some thoughts on that. Seems you've got everyone in the room.
Yeah, well, I mean, in all reality, I've known Beshlie really since I started fishing, and I'll openly admit I only started fishing 12 years ago. But I'm very good. I find solutions to problems. We have opportunities. We don't have problems. And not wishing to be derogatory to the NFFO, but what my feeling is, and spoken to many of the inshore fleet, is the reason we've got historical policies, and it's one of the questions I put to the minister when we went up there in January. Given the hurdles they're having to jump over, or policy they're having to go against, what faith have you got in the historical advisors that Whitehall have taken and created policy in the past? And one of the things is, with the small inshore fleet, is the NFFO were part of that, Mike. I'm sorry, and that's why you've got a challenge. You need these regional bodies that will come together, and the NFFO, personally, I feel, need to do something to convince the inshore fleet that you're going to fly their flag as well as the big boys' flags.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's
because then you could use them as the CICs or the larger associations like Beshlie down there at South Devon and Channel Shellfishermen. you could use them as your satellites, but the small inshore people are sat there and they don't tend to engage with anybody, and they just go out there and do their own thing because they feel that they're the poor relation, and they always have been.
Thanks, Aubrey. Mike, I'm going to get you to come back on that at the end, but I think it's that's like why I'm excited to just have everyone in the room to talk about this stuff, because I think it's this is potentially a place that you could go away from this and problem solve it. So really interesting. Thank you. I'm going to move on to, thank you, Aubrey. I'm going to move on to Joe Redfern. Joe was supposed to be joined by James Cole, but he's not with us today because he is a bit poorly. And Joe wouldn't have him in a room with him because he didn't want him sneezing on him. So, but Joe, I mean, I'm going to ask you one of the questions I was going to put to James as well, because you work really closely with him. But I think first of all, you've got a really interesting profile. I think similar to Beshlie, that you've kind of come to this. I know you've actually been fishing as well in the past, but you've come to this role. You've got a marine biology background, and you wear so many hats in Whitby. You're helping run the association. You're also part of the Shellfish Association of Great Britain, but you also set up a lobster hatchery, and you're running a charity as well. So you're doing all of this different stuff. How have you got to this point? What skills have you picked up along the way? And I guess I also just want to ask a bit about how did you go beyond just having a fishing association in a region or in an area? You've gone way beyond that. So what's taken you there?
Wow, out there. But yeah, thanks. Good to be here, everybody. I think about, so it is kind of maybe more of an unusual pathway, and I think Mike sort of touched on it earlier, but these sort of local associations having that catalyst, and the one for us was very much the mass mortalities basically in the northeast, and which started in 2021, and I was fishing full time then on a cobble, and so that's really kind of what drove me to drove the association basically and brought the other associations along the northeast together. So yeah, and my sort of background, having I suppose more of a research or conservation background really than fishing, but then having worked for a couple of seasons on a commercial boat, bridging those two gaps together is something which I think is really useful for fishing associations and NGOs and researchers to do moving forwards. And I think that's kind of where my skill set fit quite nicely, of being able to use some of the research sort of skills and use that to amplify the voices of fishermen at the same time. But yeah, so it was very much the kind of mass mortalities really that we had a crisis meeting with the Whitby Association, which I went along to, and I Googled a couple of things and printed out a couple of reports from previous events that had happened, and before I knew it, I'd kind of been nominated to be the secretary of the association without any say so from me, and kind of the rest was history after that. And I think it was a good meeting really of the immense experience, knowledge, on out at sea that the fishermen bring, with being able to kind of sort of mobilize that in a bit more of an effective way with some kind of research skills as well. So does that answer that question?
Yeah, no, it definitely does. And I think also, I had a chat with James on the phone the other day as well, and he was talking a bit about, you've got a lot going on there that obviously goes beyond a fishing association. And he was talking a bit about how when you set up the hatchery, there was a lot of kind of, I guess, a bit of skepticism about how's this going to benefit the industry and what's the point. What's the point in going beyond just having a fishing association? So maybe if you could just maybe get into that a bit, if you've got any ideas around that you want to share.
Yeah, I think it's trying to, think big, think into the future, think long term, and trying to take that kind of more ecosystem approach to fisheries management, maybe, you know, and trying to do something for betterment of the ecosystem, which I see, you know, fishing communities being very much part of the marine ecosystems, you know, being quite a big part of it. So, you know, really trying to do something for the betterment for the ecosystem, and then for the betterment of everybody, really. And I think, you know, after we had the mass mortalities, which, you know, we'll talk about a lot because it was really what drove this whole thing, and Stan's on the call today, so, you know, I'd welcome him to fill any of the gaps in as well. But it really was the, you know, huge catalyst to sort of bring everyone together. And to my knowledge, you know, there wasn't ever a time when the ports along the north east collaborated in such a way. And I hope that moving forwards, the legacy of the mass mortalities will be, you know, a greater collaboration and connectivity between the ports along the northeast.
Yeah, I think that's like, it was obviously like a big time of doom for you guys along the coast, but it does seem like you've become collectively much stronger from it. Stan, I don't know, I haven't asked you to talk, but I don't know if you have anything to add in on that.
Yeah, it's been devastating from Beshlie Poole to Whitby and beyond. Joe set the North East Fishing Collective up, and all the ports in between, and the fishermen, some environmental experts, members of the public have joined together in one voice. It's been devastating for us. Saying half the Beshlie Poole, for an example, half the Beshlie Poole potting fleets sold up or gone to the wall. The prawn fleets following the same trajectory. So we're relying on migratory stock now. The local stock is very, very low, and we've been fighting for a voice, taking on the government and the government agencies, because they've just come up with fantasy theories of the cause, when we know quite well, you know, it all started within hours of dredging of one of the most toxic cesspit rivers in the country, and we carry on the fight, and that's down to Joe setting the North East Fishing Collective up, and everybody sticking together in one voice.
Thanks, Dan. You did like a really, I mean, just watching it from down here, I'm based on the South Coast, just the amount you really managed to raise the profile of it and make sure that you were all over the media, just coming together. You really managed to have a very strong voice, and that was like, out of something horrendous, I hope that going forward you're going to have something, you know, positive that's going to leave its legacy. So thanks for that, Stan. I'm going to have a bit more time to chat at the end if you want to, but before I do, thanks Joe and Stan, I wanted to speak to David Jarrod. Yeah, I can see you there. There you are. Hey, David. So you are the Chief Executive of the Shellfish Association of Great Britain. Maybe you just want to give a bit of a background on that, and I'd really like to hear, like, again, don't want to get too far into like the doomy controversial things, but what I've seen you guys doing recently is looking at the Sentience Act and like balancing interests between NGOs and fishermen. You must have quite a job there of managing interests and opening dialogue and supporting the industry through controversy and change. So yes, if you can give a bit of a overview of your job and what the role of the SAGB is, but then also kind of, I'd really like to hear what you do balancing this, and, you know, in tough times, how do you bring something positive out of it?
Well, thanks, Emma. Yes, for those of you who don't know me, I'm David Jarrod. I'm Chief Executive of the Shellfish Association of Great Britain. The SAGB was set up in 1903, predominantly as a result of illnesses and subsequent deaths from the consumption of oysters contaminated with typhoid. So our role initially, 120 years ago, was try and have shellfish harvesting in areas that were not polluted. There's a degree of irony now that we're still doing that 120 years later. That doesn't say we've been useless at our job. It just means that things have changed over many years. But, you know, just going back on what other people have said, Mike and Beshlie and such, our job is really as an association, the SAGB is an association throughout the supply chain. We're not a fishermen's association. We have fishermen who are members. We have fishermen associations that are members, like the NFFO and Beshlie and others. But we represent the industry throughout the supply chain, whether that be wholesalers, importers, exporters, processors, retailers, caterers, as well as the fishing community. And of course, as Aubrey said, when you get two fishermen together, you get three different opinions, often opposing ones. You try and add the rest of the supply chain to that as well, it gets even harder. So when you get a challenging topic such as shellfish sentience, and on one hand you've got animal welfare organisations, NGOs pushing for a ban on all live sales of crustacea, and the other end you've got fishermen and retail and caterers not necessarily accepting the fact that crustacea are sentient and can feel pain. It's kind of a bit of a challenge because you've got to get somewhere in the middle. With regard to the Sentience Act, the whole principle of the Act was to create a committee that could look at legislation and challenge the government to see whether more legislation should be brought in to protect the welfare of crustacea throughout the supply chain. Now, my personal opinion is the fishing industry and the supply chain look after their crustacea as they best possibly can, because a dead lobster at the end of the supply chain isn't of any value. So people have to look after their product. That doesn't necessarily mean welfare is at 100%. It just means they are well enough to stay alive. So we had to try and create some codes of conduct as an industry throughout the supply chain to be used as a defence by government to say, this is what industry are doing, and it'll be a defence against the animal welfare lobby when they're arguing for legislative change. So we did that by setting up focus groups in each of the different sectors, and the codes we hope are going to be adopted by industry. We should be launching them, hopefully. I say we, I'm part of the steering group. It's not just SAGB that are doing this. Mike Roach is on the steering group as part of the SAGB Crustacea Committee, because he's chair of our Crustacea Committee. Claire Pescod as chair of the Crab and Lobster Management Group, and Seafish. Aoife Martin and Sophie Bennett are also part of the steering group for these codes. And we hope to be launching the codes in around Easter. They're more or less complete. We're just in the design stage now. And we desperately hope that industry will adopt these codes. I don't think there's going to be a great deal of change, certainly not at the fishing end. We just have to be aware that these animals are sentient now, whether we like it or not. They are deemed as being sentient under the law. Therefore, we have to have caution to that. And hopefully adopting these codes will demonstrate that we are in an industry that is looking after its product in the best way it can.
Yeah, thanks, David. I remember we did one of these talks on this kind of about a year and a half ago, and you're doing a really good job of bringing everyone together and sharing the correct information. And I think it says a lot about how associations can kind of get like, or people banding together can get ahead of the curve sometimes when it's necessary. And we can all kind of identify potential threats that could be coming up in the future and how we could progress towards something that defends us against, crisis. So yeah, thanks for that. Really interesting. I'm gonna move on now. We've got a couple of last people I'm gonna get to speak before we have an opportunity to chat between us. We've got Heather on from the animateurs, and I just think it's really important to kind of start to wrap up with a couple of points, I think. First of all, who the animateurs are and what they do, because they're really important in terms of funding and, you know, gaining access to funding. They're really knowledgeable about funds. And I think a lot of the time, funding will only be available if fishermen are associated in some way or organised in some way and have a organisation to channel it through. So Heather, I was hoping you could maybe, you know, talk a bit about what the animateurs do, potential funds that might be open to associations, or potential funds that might be open to help associations strengthen or set themselves up, are really interesting things, I think, for the people joining today.
Hi, yeah, so thank you, Emma. My name's Heather and I'm from the Fishing Animateur team. So basically what we do is provide hands-on support with and on behalf of fishermen to identify, develop and find funding for projects. So we essentially help on the ground kind of applying for kind of the different schemes that are available and all the grant funding that's available for the fisheries sector at the current point in time. We're a completely free service because we're funded by Trinity House, the Seafarers Charity and the Fishmongers Company. So we're completely free of charge and we ourselves are a charity. At the moment for fishing associations, as you're all probably aware, the new Fisheries and Seafood Scheme has recently reopened. So if you're kind of looking into applying for, say, shoreside infrastructure, anything to do with improving the health and safety on your ports or on the harbours and things like that, if you're looking to apply as an association, you can get up to 75% grant funding for those types of projects. There are also a few other kind of shoreside infrastructure projects that you can look towards, aimed at kind of energy efficiency and things like that, and processing and developing kind of a more equipped processing facility. So there's quite a lot out there under the FAST scheme. And if you did want to kind of ask some more questions about what's available under the Fisheries and Seafood Scheme, then feel free to kind of just, I mean, I'll share my email as well. So just ask some questions at the end as well. But there's also another scheme open at the moment called the UK Seafood Fund. So this is mainly aimed at like bigger projects. So it's between £150,000 projects to up to £250,000. But associations can gain up to 80% funding if you apply under the UK Seafood Fund towards projects for ports and harbour infrastructure, health and safety, and any kind of big projects that aim towards just generally improving your facilities, the health and safety of your ports and harbours. Say if the harbour wall's quite old and oh, sorry, Joe, 1 second. Sorry, one second. I'm just on a call. Yeah, sorry about that, guys. Just had a fisherman pop his head in. Yeah, so we also have the UK Seafood Fund that we can help you apply for as well. It's a little bit more complicated than the FAST Fund, but that is what we're here for. It may look like there's loads and loads of hoops to jump through, but we've done a few applications before that have been successful, and we're just here to try and buffer that experience and get you access to things that otherwise you wouldn't necessarily be able to get access to. But yeah, I think that's everything.
Yeah, no, thanks, Heather. That's great. And I can see Deborah, thanks. She's put the link into the Fishing Animateurs website. But if you want to also write your email address, or if anyone wants to message me afterwards, I can link them up with you. Yeah, I mean, funding is at the core of everything. We can't do stuff with everyone got the money to do it. So yeah, thanks to you, and like really great work the animateur team do. Right, I'm going to move on now to, and Alison, I know you're juggling kids, so let's just see how this goes. But Alison's joining us from Fishmongers Company. Fishmongers Company also helps us do the work we do. But you worked on like another project or initiative last year where you produced a toolkit that kind of put together a bit of a guide for people who are interested in setting up fishing organizations. And this is just, you know, one way that people can access resources to help get to, get to where they want to be with getting organized within their local community. So I was hoping you'd be able to tell us a bit about this toolkit you set up and a bit about Fishmonger's work. And anything else you want to throw in as voice you're going?
Yeah, thanks, Emma. I'm sorry, I'm on my phone because my computer's just decided to freeze. But yeah, so Fishmongers has been supporting and championing fishing associations for quite a long time, really, because we recognise that self-organised fishing communities are kind of at the heart of a strong fishing industry. So last year in 2023, we decided to fund a toolkit which would help people who had already set up fishing associations or were thinking about doing it. And so we commissioned a team of experts who spend their day job supporting startup organisations and other community interest companies across a whole breadth of sectors. And we asked them to develop this toolkit. So it is very much focused on the community interest company model. And this was predominantly done, I guess, because it has a number of benefits for fishing associations. And there's quite a few fishing associations that have set up themselves on this model. It's not the only model, of course. I mean, you can be unincorporated, you can be a charity, you can be a company, and there's pros and cons to each one. So in this toolkit, there is a bit of a background on each type of organisation you could be in and what might fit your particular association. With the kick model works because you can attract charitable funding, which is obviously really helpful, especially when you're a new organisation. It also means that you can operate like a business and it's for the benefit of the community, which most fishing associations are, and community is a loose term and can be defined in many different ways. And so, yeah, the toolkit, it's up on the Fishing into the Futures portal website if you're looking for it. I'm sure there'll be a link as well that we can share with you. So there we go. That was very slick. And so, yeah, the toolkit covers why set up an organization, why what you might develop in terms of your purpose. It talks about the governance structure, what things you'll need to do to keep companies' house happy, to keep your trustees and your members happy as well. It also touches on things like how to set up a bank account and provides a couple of case studies as well as to what those associations have achieved and what you could potentially achieve with yours. So yeah, I think if you have any questions about the toolkit, feel free to either direct them at Emma or myself. And if we can't help you, then we can pull in the experts that help to write this toolkit. But yeah, and also to note that there's templates up there as well. So I helped to set up the Plymouth Fishing and Seafood Association, and there's just so much work that goes into just setting up one of these things that we kind of wanted to share the resources that we developed. And so there's a lot of templates up there that you could just go in and, you know, plug in your own details into it. And so we're trying to kind of reduce that administrative burden and also really open to if anyone's got any things that they want to share on that. I think it's a revolving platform. So if you felt that there is stuff that other associations could benefit from, I'm sure Emma would be more than happy to hear from you.
Yeah, I definitely would. I definitely would. And I'm actually just going to quickly share my screen. So I'm going to plug a website that we set up like over a year ago now called the Fishing Porthole. And this was kind of exclusively put together by fishermen saying that they wanted a one-stop shop for lots of information. So we've been working on this and it's constantly growing and changing and we're adding new stuff. But we have, and I put a link in the chat, but we have a page about setting up a fishing association. And this is just the start of it. We have put the guide on there. We put a bit of information on it, but you can get all of the specific resources and you can download them on here. And this is the idea. We've kind of got this web page. We've also doing calls like this. So you guys can speak to each other and learn from each other and connect, because just I think everything we can do to help provide access for better like organisation, and getting people's voice heard is super important. And another thing you can see on the fishing porthole, so we've got we call it, it's a bit like a stakeholder map, but we've got this like visual representative of all of the people and organisations that are involved with the industry. And if you go here to this bit that says industry, organisations and associations, you can actually go through, and what I'm trying to do is make a list of all of the POs, national associations, devolved regional associations. When they have websites, I'm trying to put a click-through link to it. So if you see anyone missing, tell me. But I'm trying to kind of create a bit of a directory of all of the people and organisations that are involved in, bringing fishermen together and helping everyone get their voice heard, which, we think is a really important thing. But yeah, we're kind of at the hour now. We put half an hour aside at the end because we think it's really important for those that want to stay on the call and ask questions and have a chat.